Great. Thank you so much for that. Keeping on this subject, what other designers or architects or figures are interesting also for MoMA for their vision on eco design in addition to Mary Oxman.
So I think when it comes to sort of like as you stipulated in your question, eco design, I think there's a lot of different sort of like ways in which you're able to approach this. And as I sort of mentioned, the way that we have been doing it, for example, through Broken Nature, is through understanding the different sort of like ways in which we are connected to the environment and how design might help sort of like improve those connections. And so that not only manifests itself through new materials, which of course it does. You know, we have of course Mary Oxman, who had a specific commission for the Triennale in which she and her team explored melanin as a sort of like you know, as an incredible kind of like a pigment of nature that could also help us create more efficient objects and buildings.
Yeah.
But at the same, and for example, we also have an architect that we've actually had in the collection for a while named David Benjamin, who heads an architecture firm called The Living, in which they experiment particularly with mycelium. And so mycelium is sort of like, it's an organic material that you can use for building. You might be familiar with his work as the winner of the Young Architects program. I want to say in 2013, although you might want to double check that year. In which he created he and his team created a big structure outside of MoMA PS1 using entirely mycelium bricks, which similar to Agua, what it meant is that eventually, once the structure kind of like finished its reason for being, it could be fully composted and it would entirely go back to the earth because it was made entirely out of these materials. So Benjamin and his team continued sort of like experiment with mycelium as a construction material in ways that are really interesting. And at the same time, he is also looking at ideas of embodied energy in architecture and what that means. What is our responsibility as architects, as engineers, and as builders to use materials that, for example, don't have as much embodied energy. I don't know how familiar you might be with the concept of embodied energy. I actually wasn't until I started working with him on this. But basically the idea of embodied energy is that sort of like in opposition to operational energy, and which is what we think of in terms of sort of like what it requires the building to function. So for example, operational energy refers to the heat that it needs to, you know, that the building, or sort of like what the building requires to heat itself, to cool itself, air conditioning, all these types of things. Instead, embodied energy looks at sort of like the building as a larger system, and it sort of looks at where the materials might come from, the amount of labor that was required for these materials to become materials, to be shipped into for example, if we're talking about, for example, glass, where it needed to be shipped from or to. So all these things factor into embodied energy, which means that it's sort of like a much more of a moving concept, but equally important. And so David Benjamin is thinking of these types of topics as well. And then, of course, we also have designers that are focusing more on like what we call humble masterpieces. For example, we acquired a piece that was shown in Broken Nature by a design duo called Buro Belen. And the project is called Sun Plus, and it's basically an alternative to sunscreen. And we're thinking about how sunscreen might damage our oceans, and so instead of putting on the cream, we wear a textile that might shield us fully from the sun. So again, different sort of like approaches that look at the environment and design also at different scales.
Okay, well, super interesting, and definitely didn't know much about embodied energy. So thank you for explaining the difference to us. Really, really interesting.